mighty phantoms of the evening sky. To whom do these celestial steeds belong? When you appear to us like gods on high, what brings you here to mystify?
Hi, welcome to the Kate Valentine UFO Show on 1160 WVNJ. Today is a special treat. We have Robbie Graham joining us from England to talk about his upcoming book, Silver Screen Saucers, Sorting Fact from Fantasy in Hollywood's UFO Movies, as well as an upcoming TV documentary series based on that book, which would be quite interesting. So, some of the questions: is Spielberg a tool of the CIA? Will the Earth stand still? Do we really think there will be mass panic in the streets if the aliens land? Or will we think it's just another sci-fi set? And will they have trouble convincing us that these aliens really are the real deal? Here to answer all these questions is Robbie Graham. Welcome to the show, Robbie. Thank you so much for joining us all the way from merry old England.
Hi, Kate. How are you?
I'm quite well, thank you. It's sort of an unusual, you are a PhD candidate from Bristol, England, and it's sort of an unusual topic for a PhD. How did you get started? What first intrigued you about this?
Well, my background academically is film. I did both my first degrees in film studies and media studies. But as far as the UFO phenomenon is concerned, I've been looking at that for about 15 years now. And so my interest in UFOs and film kind of naturally merged over the years. Excuse me. As far as UFOs are concerned, I think that Hollywood is very important, and I think overlooked to an extent. In the context of UFO disclosure, I think Hollywood actually matters quite a lot. Why is that? Well, because I think that in the aftermath of a disclosure type event, whatever that turns out to be, however it transpires, however it unfolds, I think we will naturally view the events that unfold around us through the lens of, our cinematic memories. And I think that that's an inevitable occurrence, because cinema plays such a huge role in our everyday lives, and I think that it has become increasingly difficult to distinguish fact and fantasy, especially with regard to UFOs, thanks to cinema. I think, say we have some kind of disclosure type event in the relatively near future. It might be 10 years, might be 20 years, might be much sooner than that. And of course, we don't know what form that disclosure will take. But before the full facts are known or made public, would we, as cinema goers, be able to divorce Hollywood's historical UFO representations from the UFO reality with which we're presented, whatever that reality may turn out to be? And I think the answer is it seems highly unlikely. I think it would be several years down the line, once disclosure has begun to sink in, once the disclosure dust has begun to settle, so to speak, before cultural theorists, academics, set about this arduous task of deconstructing this process, this socio-cinematic process through which UFO fact and fantasy have merged over the years in our popular culture. And I think in the meantime, what you'd have is this whirlwind of iconic imagery and really generic concepts from blockbuster UFO movies swirling about in the popular consciousness, subtly, I think they really would subtly inform our perceptions, and to an extent our expectations of the UFO occupants, whether they're extraterrestrial or whatever they turn out to be. And I think that there would be a huge trail of confusion left by Hollywood's representations. I think it would take a long time to sort fact from fantasy in the wake of disclosure, given Hollywood's 60 years of representations or misrepresentations of the phenomena. So I find that very interesting.
Well, there's a lot of sort of conspiracy theories going around where the producers, such as Steven Spielberg, were fed information to sort of let it out piece by piece to the general public. And I would think that they would sort of do it somewhat accurately, if not completely accurately, so that when the real thing happened, it wouldn't be that much of a shock. What do you think about that?
Well, I refer to this as in my research as the Hollywood UFO conspiracy idea, and this notion that Hollywood has been used by the powers that be for many decades to seed specific ufological ideas into the popular consciousness in an effort to prepare us for some kind of disclosure type event. It's an interesting idea, and there is circumstantial evidence to support it broadly, but and there are a handful of cases that you can point to where there does seem to be quite strong evidence to suggest that there have been tests of public reaction. However, there doesn't seem to be an overarching agenda along those lines, in my opinion. It's not as simple as that. It's not as well coordinated as that, I don't think, which is not to say that the US government isn't intimately tied to the film industry, because it is. So I think Spielberg is interesting. He's produced more UFO-related products than any other filmmaker over the decades, and he has personally directly sort of stated that he is interested in UFOs. He classes himself as an amateur ufologist. The question is whether or not the content in his UFO movies is the result of direct inside information that's been passed to him from government insiders, or whether it's simply the result of his own knowledge on the subject, which he's gleaned through books and through watching all of the documentaries and interviews that everyone else has got access to. To be honest, I've never seen anything in a Spielberg movie that's really explosive, that really kind of pushes the boundaries of what we think we know about UFOs. It's all being kind of gleaned from existing ufological literature, and that's common across the board in Hollywood. Most of Hollywood's films borrow heavily from established ufological discourse, from literature and debate. And so what you have is you have these real-world scenarios, real-world events, such as Roswell, and real-world locales, such as Area 51. And yes, there is historical truth to these events. People can argue about that all they want, but I mean, there is historical truth behind those events and locales. But what Hollywood does, through its glossy presentation of them in the context of science fiction, is it actually fictionalizes those real-world events. And for those who have never read a book on UFOs, the idea of Roswell, the idea of Area 51, the idea of Men in Black, all of a sudden becomes immediately fictionalized. And so I think that Hollywood does have that effect on people's perceptions of the phenomenon. It serves to fictionalize UFOs. At the same time, it also serves to actualize them, paradoxically, I think, because there's this, I think that most people watch films, and although they recognize them through these fantastical creations, these fabrications, at the same time, I think that we see films as being the last word on a given topic. We think we know what happened to the Titanic because we've seen James Cameron's epic movie. We feel like we know what it's like to be on, the beaches at Normandy because we've seen Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan. We feel like we know how we understand the autistic spectrum because we've sympathized with Dustin Hoffman's character in Rain Man. And we think we know exactly what happened on, Above the Skies of America on September 11th because we've watched Paul Greengrass's United 93. And so I think that films have this stamp of authority. I don't think they deserve it, but I think that it kind of has this actualizing effect on audiences. And I think that's very dangerous generally because, of course, films aren't reality. No matter how real they seem to be, no matter how realistic they are in the events that they portray, films are mere snapshots of reality. They are skewed representations of reality, distorted through the ideological framework of the people who have made them. And so that's all the more intriguing when you look at the people who are involved in the filmmaking process. So you can look at the Department of Defense, the CIA, and these institutions, of course, have historically had a very large hand in the production of Hollywood movies, including UFO movies. And so you've got all of these different aspects that you can look at in terms of UFOs in Hollywood. So it's a fascinating subject. As far as Spielberg is concerned, again, to go back to that, I think he does know slightly more than the average person, and I think that that's simply because he is good friends with Bill Clinton and has been for a long time, very close friends with the Clinton family, and I find it inconceivable that during his long friendship with Clinton, Spielberg would not have taken the opportunity to sit down with him and push him for an answer on the UFO issue and say, look, Bill, what's going on here? Is this true? Is there any truth to these events, to this phenomenon? And I think that given Bill Clinton's historical statements on the issue, he's taken many opportunities over the decades to drop subtle hints here and there about UFOs, because he himself, of course, was very frustrated at his inability to gain real access to the subject. I think Clinton probably very well would have told Spielberg in private, look, you know, Stephen, you've read the books, you know it's real, but of course I can't really talk to you more about it than that. So I think that Spielberg may have received unofficial, confirmation from Bill Clinton behind the scenes, or from other people who Spielberg knows within the corridors of power. Spielberg's very close to the Pentagon generally. He knows a lot of high-powered generals, admirals. He's received awards from the Pentagon, from the White House. So, he's close to officialdom. And so I think that Spielberg probably will have had some kind of confirmation over the years. Whether or not he's actively serving these political masters with his films, I don't know. It's possible. I don't rule it out. But, it is pure speculation, unfortunately.
Okay, well, we'll get back to that. We're going to have to take a quick commercial break. Kate Valentine here, speaking with Robbie Graham. We are on 1160 WVNJ. Robbie is a doctoral candidate from Bristol, England. He's studying the relationship between Hollywood and UFOs. You can find out a lot more about him in his upcoming book and also a TV documentary. You can go to Silver Screen Sources, his blog spot. In the meantime, we'd like to know, what's your favorite sci-fi film? Give us a call or post it right on our website, AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. We'll be right back after a short break. Hi, welcome back to the Kate Valentine UFO Show on 1160 WVNJ. Our guest today is Robbie Graham, the author of the soon-to-be-released Silver Screen Saucers, Sorting Fact from Fantasy and Hollywood's UFO Movies. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the relationship between Hollywood and UFOs. Post them now on our website, AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. Robbie, we had a question that came in from Dave. He was wondering, out of all the movies that have been made since the 1950s dealing with aliens and UFOs, which one do you think comes the closest to being accurate, or is there one?
That's a good question. I think that many people point quite rightly to the 1951 movie The Day the Earth Stood Still as being fairly accurate, or at least tapping accurately or quite directly into what was thought to be the truth at the time among UFO researchers, and what is still held to be the truth among UFO researchers today about certain aspects of extraterrestrial visitation. Data is still very interesting content-wise in terms of the craft, the UFO that's in the movie, the flying saucer that's in the movie, the shape and structure of it, the technology that you see within the craft, and the kind of liquid metal doors. You have the lighting within the craft. You have the extraterrestrial himself, Klaatu, this human-looking extraterrestrial who was warning about the perils of nuclear war, which of course echoes the claims of contactees during that period and up to this day, in fact. So there's a lot of interest in The Day the Earth Stood Still. That was a film that was produced by 20th Century Fox under Darryl Zanuck, who was the guy who was in charge of Fox Studios at the time. People have suggested that The Day the Earth Stood Still was in fact a CIA test of public reaction to an alien landing. Linda Moulton Howe was told back in the early 1980s, when she was producing one of her own documentaries, she was told by Air Force intelligence that it was widely known among intelligence circles that The Day the Earth Stood Still was a CIA test. I don't question Linda's accounting of those events. However, I would question the truthfulness of anyone within military intelligence on the subject of UFOs. Are we being fed disinformation here? Are we hearing the truth? I don't know. But certainly the content of the film is very interesting. And of course, Darryl Zanuck as well was of interest to the CIA in the 1950s, because documentation, which is publicly available, does show that by the CIA as a potential conduit for CIA propaganda during that period. It was actually slightly after the day the Earth still had been made, but nevertheless, he was a guy who was viewed as potentially sympathetic to the needs of the CIA on screen, essentially. So it's interesting. That's one. Of course, there's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Spielberg's 1977 film, which of course took its name from the classification system of UFO sightings, which was created by Jale and Hynek. And most of the events that occur in Close Encounters of the Third Kind are based on real UFO reports. And of course, Hynek served as the film's technical advisor. So there's a great deal of truth in the film. How accurate the ending is up for debate. A lot of people have suggested that was actually seeded again by insiders, and that this was representing a real event which had occurred. People. I won't even go into it. It's too much for this short interview. But I think if you want to find out more about that, then you can do by going onto my website, or even if you just Google Close Encounters of the Third Kind and Project Serpo. A lot of people have made connections between those two things. Again, that's speculation, but certainly the majority of the events which take place in the film are based on real world events which have been documented by UFO organizations over the decades. Since Close Encounters, UFO mythology has been massively popularized, especially beginning in the 1990s with the explosion of the X-Files, and then you had films like Men in Black, Independence Day in the 1990s. And so the idea of Roswell, Area 51, and abductions really exploded into the popular consciousness, and it was thanks in large part to these entertainment products. And if what you've had, of course, is Hollywood taking greater and greater liberty with real-world accounts, and to an extent making them more fantastical than they actually are. In some cases, they're actually less fantastical than real reports. But the trend is that consistently Hollywood has borrowed very heavily from UFO mythology. And when I say mythology, I don't mean it's not real. I mean the UFO meta-narrative, which has emerged over the decades based on real-world accounts and reports.
Well, Robbie, also on the other side of the coin, Dave had a follow-up to his last question. He was wondering what movie would be the least accurate. Could it be the 1964 Santa Claus Conquers the Martians?
Santa Claus Conquers the Martians.
Yeah, I guess that wouldn't really be...
Well, no, I mean, I define a UFO movie for my studies as any film which taps directly into any aspect of UFO mythology, or notably draws from ufological literature and debate.
It's okay, Robbie. I think Dave was whooped up once too often. We had a really good question that came in from Bobby. He feels that the best movie out there is close, and the closest to his heart is Taken by Steven Spielberg. What do you feel about that?
Well, Taken is a TV series, miniseries, came out in 2002. That was a very expensive, at the time it was the most expensive television series ever made. That was produced by Spielberg, and it was really the culmination of Spielberg's lifelong obsession with the UFO phenomenon. It was focused on the idea of abduction. And yes, there's a great deal of, I don't want to say the word truth, but certainly the series was quite accurate in its representation of abduction encounters as reported by thousands of experiences. So I think that there may very well be a great deal of truth in that series. I think, however, that the abduction phenomenon is more complex and more multifaceted than the Spielberg series made out. And unfortunately, it only focused on the negative and terrifying aspects of the abduction phenomenon, of the experience, the phenomenon, whereas, as many people will testify, there's a whole other side to it, where people report much more beneficial and wondrous, benevolent and benign encounters with apparent extraterrestrial beings. So very few films over the years actually have ever explored that aspect of the phenomenon. You do have a handful, of course. I mean, you've got Close Encounters, you've got E.T., The Abyss, Starman. You had a few throughout the 1980s, but overwhelmingly, Hollywood's representations of extraterrestrials over the decades has been a fearsome one. We've been fed this very, very negative image of potential extraterrestrial life, and that concerns me, simply because even if extraterrestrials do turn out to be these malevolent invaders, which I don't think they are personally, at least I certainly don't think all of them are. Even if that turns out to be the case, then surely Hollywood's not helping by ramping up the fear about this, because there's certainly nothing we can do about it anyway, even if they are malevolent invaders, because they're surely going to be thousands of years more advanced, or even millions of years more advanced than we are, and telling people that they're ramping up the fear in advance is surely not helping the matter. I don't know. As I say, I think it's going to be very difficult after disclosure to really get people to stand back and try and divorce their cinematic memories, their cinematic perceptions of UFOs from the reality with which they're presented. People are going to automatically assume that because these beings are beyond their everyday comprehension, they are potentially dangerous and invasive, and especially if they look different to us. And I would like to see Hollywood doing more, putting out more positive representations, more balanced depictions of potential extraterrestrial life.
Well, Bobby also wrote in and said a lot of what we see today is preparing us for disclosure, and as you said before, maybe not, but I think that's the general feeling, though, at least here, that we seem to be fed a little bit at a time through these various media.
Well, that theory rests upon one giant assumption, and it's an assumption that's really never been sufficiently backed up with hard facts. The assumption is, of course, that the powers that be have a direct link anytime they want well, basically they hold the media like a puppet, like a marionette, and they are the puppet masters, and the media does whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want it. And of course, having studied the media for a long time, for many, many years, I can testify that is actually the case. The mainstream media is entirely under the thumb of the U.S. government in America, and in many countries, in fact, including here in the UK.
Well, it would be pretty tempting for the government not to have a hand in it, but we'll get back to that right after a short break. Kate Valentine here, speaking with Robbie Graham. We're on 1160 WVNJ. He also runs a popular blog, Silver Screen Saucers, which is dedicated to news, commentary, and articles on Hollywood's UFO movies. He is the author of an upcoming book and a TV documentary. Just give us a quick call on our website, AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. Let us know what you feel about all this. We'll be right back after a short break. Well, I think on that familiar note, I welcome you back to the Kate Valentine UFO Show on 1160 WVNJ. Okay, who doesn't recognize that out there? Our guest today is Robbie Graham. He is the author of the soon-to-be-released Silver Screen Saucers, Sorting Fact from Fantasy in Hollywood's UFO Movies. He's also developing an upcoming TV documentary based on that book. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Please post them now, AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. Robbie, over the break, we had an interesting question from Earl. He was wondering what you thought of Super 8. That movie enjoyed a great amount of pre-release notice, and then it didn't seem to do too well in the box office. How realistic do you think it might be?
Well, Super 8 is an interesting film. I thought Super 8 was a very good film. As an entertainment product, I thought it was one of the best UFO movies to come out of Hollywood in quite a few years. And ufologically speaking, it was interesting. There was no military support on the film. There was no government involvement in the film in an official capacity anyway. But of course Spielberg was the producer on the film and wielded quite considerable influence over the script. It was a film which showed the US government in possession of an extraterrestrial craft which has actually been broken up into lots and lots of different pieces, and the occupant of that craft, an extraterrestrial being who has been kept essentially prisoner by the US government for several decades. And of course this has echoes of the Roswell incident and many of the crash retrieval stories. So it taps very directly into UFO mythology in that sense. What was quite refreshing about the film, however, was that the extraterrestrial turned out not to be hostile after all. And although it looked fearsome, this was, it was simply human prejudices surfacing about anything that's different to us being naturally hostile. And of course, in the end, I don't want to ruin the film, of course, but the extraterrestrial turns out not to be hostile and is simply trying to escape from Area 51 and to get by it by rebuilding its ship. Same concept. It's not particularly original. This kind of thing has been done many times before, many movies, TV shows, and that's what I find interesting about Hollywood's entertainment products generally with regard to UFOs, is that the same narrative, the same core story elements keep repeating themselves over and over and over again, and they have done for decades. There's not really much originality in the UFO subgenre, and the reason for that is because scriptwriters stick so heavily to the established meta-narrative of ufology. They look at UFO books, they watch UFO documentaries, and they think that's a cool idea, let's incorporate that into our scripts. And so because the core facts of ufology kind of stay the same, because we're talking about a real phenomenon here, Hollywood's representation of the phenomenon also stays largely the same. I mean, of course, it's changed over the decades to an extent, but really you're still dealing with the same key ideas. And Hollywood follows ufological discourse, not vice versa. Art imitates life in the case of Hollywood's UFO movies.
Well, also, I think there's some sort of a creation of a myth and a continuation of that as well. We did have a question that came in from Dan. He was wondering if you ever looked into the allegations that the film of the landing on the moon was a hoax created by Hollywood, and then Dan said that he doesn't believe that it was. And I was wondering what your thoughts on that would be.
I'll state straight off the bat that I'm no expert on the moon landings. Of course, okay. I'm familiar with the conspiracy surrounding the moon landing, but I've never looked into it in a serious way. However, I do know some people who have, and I've been asked many times, I've been asked this question specifically about Stanley Kubrick and his possible role in the staging of footage. It's an interesting idea. I think that I've no doubt that we went to the moon, and I think that the Apollo crew landed there in '69. However, I do think that if there was any photographic fakery, and I think that the evidence is sufficient to suggest that there was photographic fakery, then I think that may be a result of what was seen on the moon, which was not appropriate to be shown in photographs. I think it's possible that, very likely, in fact, that astronauts on the moon, over multiple missions over many decades, over the decades of the moon missions, did encounter UFOs on or around the moon, including Apollo 11. And I think that as a result of that, certain photographs had to be doctored, potentially, certain footage had to be doctored or reshot. Even if you take UFOs out of the picture completely, say there were no UFOs there at all, then I think it's entirely possible as well that the photographs taken on the moon were simply not of a ideal quality for public relations purposes. You know, the moon landings was essentially a gigantic PR stunt. I mean, that's what it was. And if you can't show that, if you can't show this great achievement in all its glory in photographic form, then you've kind of wasted your time. And so, if your photographs aren't good enough, if they've been damaged, if the exposure was terrible because of the conditions on the moon, whatever, you know, there could be multiple reasons why the photographs didn't turn out very well, then it may have been necessary to reshoot some of those photographs in a studio, in a controlled environment back on Earth after the fact. I think that's entirely possible, and I don't think that really stretches the imagination too far.
That makes more sense than the whole thing being fake. Kate Valentine here, speaking with Robbie Graham. We're on 1160 WVNJ. Well, Robbie, along those lines, have you seen Apollo 18?
Yes, I have.
What
terrible
did you think
film.
But it would sort of go along with what you were saying, that there may have been stuff that, that was they had to cover up.
Exactly. So again, here this is another example of Hollywood basically just tapping into UFO literature and debate. But the execution of the movie, unfortunately, although it had an intriguing idea, was quite poor, and the screenplay was seriously lacking. I mean, they went with alien rocks. Rocks just really aren't scary.
Well, but as you said, though, we've been presented with a certain, I mean, everybody expects the iconic little gray as an alien, so no one really thinks that a rocket's going to be... But you never know. I guess it'll be interesting when the real thing happens. Bobby had another comment, too. He said that MUFON is... one of the directors is of the feeling that we were told not to come back. And you hear that a lot, too. Like, we were told not to go back to the moon, that a lot of the Martian problems that they had with the various satellites and orbiting sort of devices were destroyed. And you always hear this sort of like a little bit of a conspiracy thing. Sure.
I mean, well, there's always going to be a conspiracy about pretty much anything that the government says. But no, I think that it may be valid, especially with the Mars scenario, because it is very odd how many probes have failed. NASA has had a hugely disastrous history of sending probes to Mars, as has Russia. The failure rate, I've actually got an article on my blog detailing the failure rate of Mars probes over the decades, and it is very interesting. Some people have suggested that people on Mars don't want us to go there. What are the people on Mars? Who knows? Remote viewers working formerly for DIA and CIA claim that there are people on Mars in underground bases. But again, how much truth there is to that, I don't know. How much accuracy there is to their remote viewing, I don't know.
I don't think any of us do, unfortunately. But what is your TV documentary about? That sounds very intriguing.
I was going to say I should probably clarify some of the points you're making there. Just to clarify, this book it's in progress at the moment. I'm writing it right now. It will be released hopefully next year. So it won't be this year, but it'll be next year if all goes to plan, and everything's going smoothly at the moment. Yeah, Bryce Zabel and I teamed up a few months back on this project. We were both wanting to write a book on UFOs in Hollywood, and Bryce suggested to me that we write it together, or we work on it together. And so that seemed like a good idea. And so what we've decided to do now is that I'm going to be writing the book. Bryce is writing the foreword for the book, and as the book progresses, Bryce is going to be looking at optioning the book as source material for a TV documentary project, which will mirror the content of the book. So the book is going to be 8 chapters, and so we would have an 8-episode television series, a documentary series called Silver Screen Sources, sorting facts from fantasy and Hollywood UFO movies. And this would be exploring the history of Hollywood's representations of UFOs and asking a lot of the big questions that arise from this topic. So really the book is about encouraging the reader to more thoughtfully consider the role of cinema in their lives and its significance in relation to the UFO ET issue. And the book is really, it's going to be an exhaustive, an extensive examination of the cultural and political interplay between UFO movies and the UFO phenomenon itself, and it will go from 1950 to now. And I really hope that, both before and after disclosure, if that date comes, and I think it will, that the book will really serve as kind of like a guide through the labyrinth of UFO cinema. And so we're going to have a whole chapter in there examining government interest and involvement in UFO movies, although for the most part the book will be concerned with history and representation, specifically with how Hollywood chooses to represent UFO events and how the industry draws from and distorts UFO literature and debate. It's going to be structured around clearly defined ufological themes, so you're going to have a chapter on invasion, both covert and overt. You're going to have a chapter on benevolent visitation, abduction, government UFO secrecy and cover-ups, ancient astronauts, anomalous phenomena, UFOs in outer space, and Hollywood's representation of all of these strands of ufology over the decades, and the extent to which they've borrowed from established ufological discourse. And so the questions will be, and these are the questions which really drive me in all of my research, do Hollywood UFO movies fictionalize UFOs in the public mind, actualize them, or both? Does Hollywood fuel the UFO mythos, or vice versa? Is it life imitating art, or vice versa? If and when we make full and open contact with ETs, would we as cinemagoers, as I'd asked before, be able to divorce Hollywood's ET representations from the reality with which we're presented? And a key question is, should we? Because, as I've said, a great deal of Hollywood's UFO movies content has already been, shaped by supposedly factual literature and events and debates, and so I think there may already be a good deal of truth in those films, and so should we divorce the representations from the reality?
Well, I'll tell you, time will tell. That's actually very interesting, and it'll be great for you when the truth comes out, if you've even come close. Kate Valentine here, speaking with Robbie Graham. We're on 1160 WVNJ. Robbie's a doctoral candidate from Bristol, England. He's studying the relationship between Hollywood and UFOs. You can find out more in his blog spot, Silver Screen Saucers, and his upcoming book, and as well as hopefully a TV documentary based on that book. We'd love to hear your comments. And what's your favorite sci-fi movie? Post it now on our website, AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. Be right back after a short break. Thank you. Dave is really getting into this, Robbie. Welcome back to the Kate Valentine UFO Show on 1160 WVNJ. Our guest today is Robbie Graham, the author of the soon-to-be released Silver Screen Saucers, sorting fact from fantasy in Hollywood's UFO movies. Love to hear your thoughts on all this. Post them now on our blog, on our website, AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. Actually, Star Trek was one of the things that I absolutely loved at one point. How did you feel about that?
I love Star Trek. I love Star Trek, and I love the original Star Trek theme tune you were just playing there. It's so evocative. I think Star Trek's a really smart series. All of the series, apart from the most recent one, which was cancelled. That was several years ago now. That was pretty awful. but Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Next Generation, and the original series, all very, very clever. And there were a few of the episodes in each of those series, in fact, which did tap very directly into UFO mythology, very overtly into UFO mythology. Some of them reference the Roswell incident and government conspiracies to cover up aliens and things like that. But more broadly speaking, of course, Star Trek is a space opera, and I be interested in Hollywood's representations of extraterrestrial visitation of Earth, usually in the here and now, sometimes in the future, but usually in the here and now. Of course, space opera is more concerned with universal matters out in the great cosmos with multiple alien races interacting and not necessarily visiting each other for the first time. I'm interested in the idea of first contact on screen.
Well, I'll tell you, Bobby sent in another few comments. He was talking about Tesla, Mars as a whole, another show. And Glow also had a comment, but she was wondering if The Day the Earth Stood Still is a good example of Hollywood's depiction of the UFO phenomenon. And, of course, she had answered that as yes. And we had another question that came in, and I'm really unfamiliar with this, is Bobby was wondering if you knew Andrew Bisago, B-I-S-A-G-O. He might have spelled the last name wrong, but Andrew was one of the fellas that went to Mars on the JUMP program. I
know of Andrew. I don't know him personally. I know of Andrew Basiago, and I've read the material. I'm not convinced remotely, I have to say. I think it's utter nonsense.
Okay. Well, Christy came in, too, as a compliment for you. She said that Robbie has great poll questions on your website, which you definitely do. Silver screen saucers on your opinion poll, UFOs in Hollywood. What kind of opinions are you getting on that, Robbie, if you could just disclose some of them?
Sure. Well, one of the opinion polls I have is, what is your favourite UFO alien visitation movie? The leader there is based on about 1,100 votes. Is Close Encounters of the Third Kind, followed by The Day the Earth Stood Still, and then that's followed by what do we got? Independence Day, and then Contact. Or The Thing, excuse me. But I think it's interesting that the two most popular UFO movies with visitors to the site are actually films in which extraterrestrials are portrayed as either benign or at least enlightened or benevolent beings, and I think that that's quite interesting because Hollywood is so bent on portraying them as these monsters, when actually I think a lot more people would prefer to see some more nuanced representations of extraterrestrials, and Contact rates quite highly as well. I think Contact's a great film. Other polls on the site, we have to what extent do Hollywood's UFO movies and TV series influence popular expectations of potential alien life? And the result is significantly. There's a choice between entirely, significantly, slightly, or not at all, and 70% of people say significantly. We've got, do Hollywood's UFO movies fictionalize the UFO phenomenon in the public mind, actualize it, or both? And the result there is 62% say both, but more people than not say fictionalize. More people say fictionalize than actualize, excuse me. And of course we have the which collection of terms best characterizes the US government and military involvement in Hollywood. Largely open, largely covert, mix of the above, or what involvement? And most people say largely covert, so most people are quite suspicious of military involvement in Hollywood, and rightly so. But it's surprising that there is at least 7% of people who have no idea that the military is involved in Hollywood at all. And I think that that's quite representative. I think that a great deal of people are completely oblivious to the fact that the US military, the defense establishment, and the intelligence establishment have a very close symbiotic relationship with Hollywood.
Well, but of course the question would come up, if it was covert, how would you know?
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, you have to kind of start with what you know, with what you can establish, and then you have to consider testimonies, I suppose. You have to consider the weight of testimony that would indicate that there is something more going on than meets the eye. And there are a handful of very compelling cases which suggest that, indeed, today the relationship is far more deep than any agency would acknowledge, especially with the CIA. CIA infiltrated Hollywood back in the 1950s and 1953 and covertly influenced the content of a number of films, genre pictures back in the 1950s, including like Animal Farm and 1984, The Quiet American, many more. And that was all done covertly because the head of Paramount Studios' censorship department, a guy called Luigi Larashi, was actually an active CIA agent as well, unbeknownst to Paramount. So he was actually carrying out orders on the part of the CIA to censor the content of films.
Well, filmmaking was so, how would you say, powerful in Europe in the 40s. Certainly the Nazis used it to their benefit. I'm sure that technique was just picked up and brought here. Carol was wondering if you have ever had a sighting, or have you known anyone that has been abducted?
I've never had a sighting that's truly compelling. I've seen things in the sky which I can't explain, so the kind of UFOs in the most mundane sense. But there's nothing that I can point to and say that's definitely a craft that's been built outside of Earth, and that's there's nothing like that I've seen. I mean, I did see something very interesting over the Statue of Liberty in 2003 when I was in America. A sphere, silvery reflective sphere, not far above the Statue of Liberty, and I was looking at this and I thought, that's amazing. Why is no one else pointing at this thing? And it stayed there until I was on the Staten Island ferry when I saw it, and this is broad daylight back in July of 2003. And I would have thought that loads of people would have seen it. Maybe they did, but I never saw any reports of it. That's one thing I saw that was quite strange. As for abductions, I've met and spent quality time with quite a few people who claim to have had experiences with otherworldly beings, abductees, experiencers, contactees, who all have very fascinating things to say, and who I find very credible.
And you're right. I mean, certainly there is a great amount of fear associated with abductions, but there seems to be a lot of benefits to it as well. Or I shouldn't say benefits, but so much as like good experiences as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and I think that Hollywood is really missing a trick with that. I think they really need to branch out and explore the more interesting side of UFOs and extraterrestrial contact, and just get past this myopic view of UFOs as being these monstrous of aliens as being these monstrous creatures bent on destruction of humanity. I think that there's far more interesting things to be said about the phenomenon, and I hope that Hollywood eventually realizes that and starts to draw from those aspects of UFO literature in the future.
Well, I guess bad aliens sell better than good aliens, though.
But again, I don't know that that's the case. I mean, that's what people say. Mm-hmm. But again, as I've just said, the opinion polls on my blog indicate that the two most popular ones are films in which aliens are not hostile. And of course, one of the most successful films of all time is Spielberg's E.T. Mm-hmm. That was the most successful film of all time for over a decade. When it was released in 1982, it was the most successful film ever until Spielberg topped it himself with Jurassic Park in 1993. Close Encounters was a hugely successful film, one of the most successful films ever made at that point in time. You've had a lot of very successful benevolent alien movies. In fact, you had so many of them in the 1980s that it became cliched, the alien as savior throughout the 1980s.
Well, Robbie, I'll tell you, we're coming pretty close to the end, so I want to make sure we get all your information in. Could you please tell the audience about your blog spot and your upcoming book?
Sure. My blog is Silver Screen Sources, and that's silverscreensources.blogspot.com. And there you'll find lots of articles and commentary and news updates on Hollywood UFO movies. And my forthcoming book, which will be released next year, hopefully, is called Silver Screen Sources, Sorting Fact from Fantasy and Hollywood UFO Movies. Bryce Zabel is writing the foreword for the book, and if all goes according to plan, we will hopefully be seeing a TV documentary adaptation of the book in the near future.
It sounds great. Thank you so much for being here today. A fascinating discussion on Hollywood and UFOs.
Thank you, Kate.
Oh, no, really, it was our pleasure. It was a great discussion. Thank you. And thanks, as always, to Bill and Dave for his choice of music today. And, of course, thanks to our sponsors. Mostly thank all of you for listening, for all your comments. We always like to know what you're thinking about all this, so keep them coming. Tune in next Friday at 1. Our guest will then be Nick Redfern with his new book, Keep Out, all about secret bases. If you've missed any of this program, you can hear it again this Sunday at 4. Or better yet, you can still subscribe to our still free podcast. Have a great weekend, and until next Friday, remember, keep your eye on the sky.